I suppose I'll start with the first time I saw Kathy's work, which was, I think, about 2008. Does that make sense? The first time you publicly showed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Around that, yeah.
And I was quite struck by it, and it left an impression on me, and I remember it. And the things that really jumped out were how joyful it was and how unself-conscious it was in terms of its execution. And the subjects were things I was already interested in, like our immediate environment and scuzzy pavements in Dublin and pigeons and animals, and I think were the subject matter for any painter, but that's just my opinion. So the other thing I got from them was this idea that you have and I think I remember it myself when I was doing a drawing, and I was doing it really quickly because I wanted to get past the boring bits. I wanted to leave out things that weren't interesting, and I really got that off the work. And there might be somebody coming to the door to play, and you need to finish that drawing before that happens. I suppose what I did learn is that you work very quickly in one shot, and that kind of immediacy, I think, is quite apparent and arrives quite clearly in the finished work. So, and I think you've always preserved that, which is not so easy, which brings me to the next thing that was in my head, and I was going, well, you took the trouble to go back to college and do an MA, and where you learned all kinds of things like painting as a system of signs, of a highly personalised nature, and here you are back, having learnt all those things, making paintings of dogs and flowers. What's going on?
Return to college for me was more about a lack of confidence in what I was doing than anything else, and being confused about what made it art, because I was making what I felt were images, and I didn't really know why they would be art or why I should show them to anyone, because I enjoyed doing them, but didn't feel like I fully understood what the context was. So I went back and did the MA, which was no painting, all theory of art. And that allowed me to, I didn't immediately return to painting, like I thought I was going to be an art writer for a while. And then, it just slowly ended up leading me back there, because I felt like I had kind of an understanding of what was going on in the contemporary art world, which I actually don't feel like I do anymore really so much. And I'm okay with that too, but I kind of felt like I could put it aside and go back to what I felt like doing. And then somehow what I felt like doing started taking on meaning by itself.
In a related kind of area, what I just really remember as well is there seemed to be an absence. Now let me finish this, because it might sound good as it starts, but it'll finish well. That there was an absence of technique. That's not an absence of skill, an absence of technique. And that's no mean feat. I think the absence of technique is a technique in itself. And I'm curious to hear your position on that comment, because you've been painting now since 2008, so actually you will have acquired skills. Are they going to get in the way of what you want to achieve, or are they useful to you?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because the paintings I would have been making back then were a lot more simple and childlike. My kind of concerns as a painter, I want to challenge myself and grow and learn things about my process. But at the same time, I want to keep that sense of naivety or freshness, or lack of self-consciousness, as you call it. So it's just it's a balance of sometimes things get overworked, and lots of things get overworked, and lots of things then get put aside. So the paintings, I think, get better, like technically better, in that I have learned how to deal with light and colour, and even painting people and representing, people or animals a little bit better, but always stopping before it starts to feel in any way kind of too set or too too representational. You know, I suppose that's why the speed is part of it, and that's why I usually work very quickly after I've taken a photo of the thing that I want to paint. I bring it back to the studio quite quickly within a matter of days, and like if I don't, I sometimes start to get sick of it, or something else. I've seen something else that
goes stale.
Yeah, that gets my attention. So yeah, so I suppose that's part of being able to maintain that kind of lack of technique, is having as little in the way between the experience of the moment and painting it, so that I can kind of feel my way through it rather than overthink it.
Or the record of the encounter is simply a jumping off point.
It definitely needs to be worked out in paint, but like it's not, I'm not the kind of painter who's really concerned and interested in paint as a substance. Like I'm not trying to find out the possibilities of paint and where it will go, even though I like looking at other painters who do that. That's not my relationship with it. So the paint is a means to an end, and the end is that I do want to represent the experience of the moment. So the photograph is a tool in that way, but I think if I just was, you know, I could learn to maybe photograph or make sculptures about it, you know. Maybe I won't, because life is too short and I'm doing painting now. But in a way it's kind of it, like what I'm trying to show you is the moment itself rather than the painting somehow, if that makes sense.
The title of the show is Soft Fascination. I don't know if you want to talk about where you got the title from. I was intrigued by it. Adam Buxton. Do you want to share that with the audience?
Adam Buxton is a comedian podcast that I listen to, and he goes for walks and kind of rambles and talks to celebrity guests and stuff. But he's lovely. He's just my kind of person, and so he described this theory of soft fascination, which is something that happens to your attention when you're spending time in nature. It's quite a scientific theory that was developed in the 90s by psychologists. And the other way of calling it is attention restoration theory, which has the acronym ART, coincidentally. But so it's about, there's like different ways of focusing your attention. The direct attention way, there's a few different types of attention, but direct attention is task-based, or trying to work something out in your mind that needs to be worked out, and it requires effort, and it can lead to stress. Whereas the soft fascination type is effortless, and it basically comes from looking at something like patterns in nature, something that distracts the eyes from what the other thoughts might be thinking or building up in the back of your head, and kind of like a baby kind of forces you to just
So would that
distracted.
be like clouds or ripples in water, natural phenomenon?
Yeah, so like you'll see a lot of that stuff, and that's always been something that I'm interested in, but I didn't know there was a word for it. But yeah, you'll see lots of patterns, and it doesn't have to be in nature. Like there's a wood pattern there, and
That's still nature, isn't it?
Still
The
nature.
weave of the
but you know you could get absorbed in a carpet pattern or trees or whatever. I liked the title just without any of that explanation, because I like the idea of the softness. I like it, my work is very soft. In its content, and its style is quite soft as well, and kind of blurry, and
but there is something comforting about getting lost in the patterns of your paintings as well. So it's an easy fit for me to accept.
And I suppose it's kind of like there's kind of all of the things that I've chosen to paint in this exhibition, and most of the time are very nice, with the odd exception, like maybe the back of a truck isn't so nice to some people. But they're all very comforting, or they all represent some kind of a moment of relief from the everyday kind of struggles, or even the big struggles. Yeah.
I call them the mundaners.
The mundaners, yeah.
Yeah.
Or worse things, you know.
Yeah.
Like, so I suppose, yeah, those moments of relief are ubiquitous, you know, in that they're accessible to everybody, and that's kind of another thing that is important to me in my painting, that I don't make work that ever feels like it would exclude anyone, and I don't represent things that would exclude people either. So those examples of that kind of soft fascination they're all like, no matter what you're going through in life, or no matter what your position is in life, these things are pretty much accessible to you.
Okay.
So I think that's important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Animals are the next thing I wanted to talk about, and they have always featured in your work, and I think they feature actually in painting quite a bit, and I don't know, there's obvious reasons. I mean, the first painting that we know of apparently was cave painting of animals. Who knows, there could have been writing before that, but they perform all kinds of different functions in painting, and there's some kind of correlation, I think, between painting, which is beyond language. Animals are beyond language, certainly our language. So they can operate in all kinds of ways, and I wonder, are you conscious, or do you want to talk about that? Are they, for you, avatars, or are they simply just a dog in a painting?
Certain ones would be more avatars, like my dog Kipper. There's only one painting of him in this show, and he's very small, but he's still very important. And so I would sort of project a lot onto him when he's in the paintings. And he, like, you might see hints of that in their titles, that I'm kind of loading on a lot of emotion or meaning, or sort of pointing in the direction of a different story. And that would be kind of present when he's involved. And then I suppose, the monkeys over there in the back would be similar, in that there's sort of a pensiveness, or like, I suppose there's the emotions that I would be kind of adding on to the animals would be unrealistic for them to be feeling.
Yes.
So in that way, it's sort of...
They aren't going to contradict you, are they?
No, they can't. So maybe it's abuse. But we're kind of... It's a joke in a way, and it's also a way of me working out a feeling, or pointing to a feeling. Yeah. And then some of them are just something that I'm interested in the context of the neighborhood, or their patterns, or, you know, they kind of represent a lot of different interests. Yeah. Okay,
because the text is really funny, and I recommend to read it. Ben Stafford did a brilliant job, but instead of anthropomorphizing, he flips it over, and he gives an account from the point of view of the dog, your dog. And you could come out very well in it, I have to say.
He likes me. My dog likes me. I think Ben likes me as well.
Yeah. And it's a feature in some literature. There's a book called The Peregrine, where the author, it's named Baker, obsessively followed 2 peregrine falcons with the explicit intention of being able to get into the subjectivity of the bird instead of a human subjectivity. And that he would imagine flying over rivers and streams and towns, it's quite compelling in terms of its aims. The animal in the end, I think, in art is some kind of vehicle. It's another sign as opposed to an animal, obviously. So you get so far with talking about it, I feel, and then it kind of stops in a way. The idea of changing a position to understanding how a bird sees is to reintroduce wonder, and as an artist our eyes become jaded and our perspective can become very fixed, and maybe it's just a way of just jumping out of that.
Yeah.
So you describe a method where you go for a walk and you have a ritual, which it's a lovely ritual, where you might and hopefully encounter something that may lead to a painting. And that means that you go to the studio afterwards and you aim towards completing a painting in one session. So in a way, I think it sounds more like a poet or a songwriter makes work, where there's an emotional response to an incident or an event. And I guess there's always going to be a dimension of success or failure to see if you land safely or close to what the intention originally was. So Kathy uses a wet on wet technique. I don't know if you're familiar with what, some of you may or may not be. So that means that you're kind of sliding around with the paint a bit, aren't you? And the paint is making its own kind of ideas about what it wants to do. So I think what's great about the painting is they will hold on to fatality and forsake verisimilitude or accuracy over making a good painting. How do you steer a course through this process? And do you stand entirely out of the way? Or what happens between that position of control and non-control?
I don't know if this is talking about it too technically in terms of the process, but I do paint wet on wet, but I also do paint in layers. So like the first and second and maybe third layer are quite controlled and planned. They're the parts that I kind of know what I'm doing in response to what I've seen. And they can sometimes be, and I suppose there's layers in terms of what I want to represent as well. So like, say if there is a sky or something that's gone on underneath a sky that is like at dusk or something, like I can get really like rapturous if there's like a pink sky and like everything all of a sudden is really paint worthy. So I'm taking loads of photos, and so in that way, like if I'm starting with the sky, I will know exactly and be very excited about the colours that I'm using and take pleasure in all of that. And then I suppose the layers start to build up and the patterns start to come in, and that's when it becomes more playful, and that's when the unexpected starts to come in, and I start to figure out what details are going to be put in. And like on the really successful ones, which would be like ones that have made it in here, there would usually be just like some final touch, like a tiny detail or like a shadow or something that goes in that makes me understand that it's a success and that it's done. So I mean, like, I'm not sliding around that much, you know, like I do kind of, I know what I'm doing to an extent, and I suppose it's back to not really, I enjoy the paint and I love the paint, but I'm the boss of the paint.
You're the boss. Wow, interesting. So you completed a residency and you made a beautiful series of works and the title of the show was a really poetic title, Up Here, My Eyes Are Green Leaves. And you were, I suppose, having to deal with a whole new set of immediate circumstances, which meant there wasn't, well, there's still dirty pavements in Paris, but there's still pigeons, isn't there? All those things. But I think when I look at some of the paintings that you were turning towards statues that were quite representative of imperial capitals and grand interiors. And what I'm leading to here is that how much do you think that impacted in terms of things you're interested in?
It was a tricky one to figure out. So the title. So there was never actually an exhibition that I made from Paris.
Yeah.
I made a series of paintings, and they were gathered together by
in the book.
Benjamin Stafford.
Yes.
In the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which had that title, which was the title of one of the paintings. But once I arrived there, it was hard to figure out what to paint, because I had moved around a bit obviously before, and I don't only paint Dublin, but usually I'm in that environment.
Yeah.
And usually I'm painting things from a familiar environment that all of a sudden pop out and become interesting.
Yeah.
Whereas in Paris you're totally overwhelmed, and
Yes.
everything is
Yeah.
glorious and grand and elevated.
You don't know where to look.
Yeah, and nothing needs you really. Like,
No. No.
So I decided to just kind of give in to that and become a tourist.
Yes.
And look at the things that all the other tourists were looking at, which was the statues and the nice patterns in the buildings.
Yes.
Rather than try and, be down and out in Paris, you know what I mean, and try and play a role. Like I just was, I tried to stay honest about my experience, which was that I was a bit overwhelmed and like a small person looking up at these things,
Things that painters or artists are interested in does change over time. And would you be able to talk a little bit about that? So Kathy, 12 years ago, is interested in different things, and it could be just in relation to paint or what you think is important in terms of what you can do with making paintings. Or is it something you're interested in talking about?
A lot of the things that I'm interested in have repeated or have cycles and return. And new things get gathered up along the way. So like from Paris, I think that statues made their ways into my paintings, in that they're these weird, silent beings that are kind of trapped inside themselves forever, and really handy to project onto again, like animals. I don't think that my interests changed that much. I think that I just, my gaze kind of continues to expand and deepen and become more interested in things in new ways. And, like in terms of painting, like there's a lot of light and shadow in this show, which is something that I've been looking at in the last 6 months or so. But in similar contexts and with similar.
So I'm thinking about emotion, and painting is funny in that it goes in and out of various fashions, like music, like literature. And I don't know how easily contemporary art sits around the subject of emotion. I'm going to make a general statement here, so you have to let me off. And I do think there's space, though, for expression of emotion in painting, but it became a little bit icky and a bit of a funny one. And you came out in, what was it, 2000 and out of college in 2007 maybe, or
2008 and then 2010 again.
Yeah. There was, I think, a shift in terms of people's contemporary art's acceptance of the medium of paint around the late 90s, where there was a general kind of suspicion of it. It's so easily colluded in the art market and was just another form of currency. So it managed to find its way back into favour, and who knows, is it still in favour or not? I think it is. But the kinds of art you were looking at in college and you were interested in, has that changed over that period of time, over the last 15 years? Or is that still the same too?
I was looking at less painting in college, even though I was still painting.
Yeah.
And that wasn't because it wasn't in favour so much as that I think your mind is more open in a way when you're younger. And I mean, like, I don't really mean that in a bad way, but just that like your interests are just more expansive and you're just like feeling around to try and figure out what you are and what you're made of.
Yeah.
And your attention span is better and all that kind of stuff. So nowadays, yeah, like the work that I like is kind of more self-centered, or like more stuff that goes along with, you know, stuff that, I mean, I make the kind of work that I would like to see.
Yes.
And so I like more artists that are like me, or who I'd like to be like, rather than, I don't go to like vastly different, I don't go to many exhibitions that aren't painting really at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, like it becomes narrowed but more pungent in a way, your interests, I suppose.
So painting in relation to the, I suppose, ever-present screen time that we have, and that's accelerated over the last 10 years. And I'm thinking about dash cams when I look at the back of the truck there, whether you had your phone on. I don't know how you might have taken a picture.
No, it was
if you did.
The red lights were
the red. Well, I'm not going to arrest you for that. So the blurry kind of boundaries between us and technology are getting blurrier. So we have Alexa telling us what we want and what we might need. We have Fitbits telling us we're lazy. And I wonder about your position in terms of painting and its ability to resist that, or whether it just manages to fold back into the whole digital image economy exchange and have no power to stand separate. So it's always a tension. It's always been there over the last 150 years since the camera, but it seems to be ever accelerating. Mm-hmm. So do you want to talk about that? It's not really a question.
I think that the whole screen thing and social media thing has been an asset to my work, actually.
Okay.
Since Instagram became prominent, because I just get to see so much work that I would never have known about before, and once you get good at it, it starts to tell you, feed you back stuff that you like, obviously. That's how the internet works. But yeah, it's given me access to whole worlds of artists and painters that I didn't know about, and it is great for image sharing. There is obviously a loss there in terms of standing in front of something and noticing new things and all that kind of thing. But yeah, I think for somebody who works in flat, mostly square, colourful forms, it's been handy for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I was hoping to open it up the floor to questions.
Geraldine O'Neill has asked me about the difference between the process of or the act of taking the photograph and then how it slows down in the studio while you're painting. Was that the gist of it?
It's also about making them sacred. Like, you're probably taking multitudes of images, but then there's one and you make sacred and you make these amazing, beautiful paintings.
Yeah,
and
okay.
It's just like, I don't know if you want to comment on that or different.
Yeah, so about making them sacred. Yeah. It's a way of trying to stay within that moment a bit longer and process the moment, and I suppose then to take the step further and try and share it, and try and communicate it to others. So I suppose that's where the magic happens, that if you feel like you've gone through the process and come out the other side, that you think that somebody else looking at it will understand what you mean. I suppose that's when it's a successful
I'm glad
paint.
to use the word magic, because they are magic.
Oh, thank you. Geraldine O'Neill has said that her paintings are magic.
I would have thought that the photograph is often disappointing to you in terms of how it records your experience of a phenomenon or a moment or something. I wonder, do you find you have to be very careful with how you use that photograph? I'm speaking from personal experience. If I tried to do this as briefly described by you, I would be a slave to that photograph. And it's the lenses, compression of that place and destruction of my memory, my own visual memory of it, would be such that I would find it very difficult to make the personal choices that are in your paintings and the compositional choices that aren't dictated by the lens.
Is that a question?
I think, yeah, so
You said loads of things that were.
the question is like about,
You have to be very careful. Talk to us about how you use that photograph.
How do I use the photograph? So, I think as you're talking there, it just reminded me of what you said when you were opening the talk, something about getting stuff down quickly and only what you want to do. I can't remember how you phrased it.
Oh,
but,
getting rid of the boring bits, ignoring
bits, yeah.
Ignore the boring bits.
Yeah. So that's what I do. Like, I only paint the stuff that's interesting to me, which is usually the colors or the light or, bits of the subject matter, or, trying to get to the most essential parts of a color, say, rather than trying to represent what the whole color is doing, the whole scene is doing. And just trying to, filter it into the most interesting points the way a child would, I suppose. That's how I work with photographs.
Small question.
Yes, please.
I was wondering, something that we briefly discussed when we were talking about your work is like the idea of thinking versus feeling. And I know you talked about Pessoa as an influence, as an artist who prioritizes emotion over intellect. And I suppose it relates to what you were just saying to Mark, talking about trying to get to the essence of something. Do you think, is there, another question now, do the paintings fulfill like an intellectual as well as an emotional process for you, or are they inseparable, or do they do both, or neither? Sorry, that's maybe.
So the question is kind of in relation to thinking versus feeling, and they're all, the Pessoa who you mentioned there and who I mentioned to you, has a way of looking at the world and writing poetry that favors like kind of a stupidity of like I can't remember what his word is, but just like looking at the world without thinking. So a dumbness in a way.
Yeah.
And just that is kind of the highest form of experiencing life. And it's a little bit like mindfulness or something, I suppose, where you're just in the moment and looking and all your senses are working and you're not trying to figure out what it means or you're not trying to intellectualize it.
Yeah.
And painting for me is all about that. There's very little thought in it. It's physical and visual, so the thoughts are for other people to think.
But they're quite sad, Kathy. Is it okay to say that? Do
That's
people
okay
say
too,
that? I find them very happy sad. They're very happy sad. Yeah.
Because I think that in the sort of joyful nature, there's a nod to the need for that because it's in contrast to something else. Maybe.
Yeah.
And some of them are just a little bit sad as well. Like the dog is sad. But yeah.
Oh, that's the tension in them because they're celebrating a moment and being in the present moment, and at the same time, I think there's some kind of disavowal around. Yeah, I'm celebrating this, but I can't. There's a tug of war I get from them, and that's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think it's about like aspiration and
Yes.
the failure to fulfill that as well, which is like life and also making it work.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. That's it.